So you want a Kawasaki ZX6R. Look, I know exactly what you're about. You want a real super sport. Not one of those sissy boy commuter bikes, not a parallel twin naked bike with fairings pretending to be something it's not. You want one of those screaming inline fours that defined an entire generation of motorcycling. Aggressive ergos, 16,000 RPM redlines, a bike that makes you feel like you belong on a racetrack. At least for the first 15 minutes or so, and then for that short moment, you'll look fast and feel fast and maybe earn a little bit of respect. But sooner or later, reality is going to set in. Look, we don't live in a world dominated by 600cc supersports anymore. And if anything, the inline four is starting to feel like kind of a novelty. The industry's moved on, people have moved on, opinions have changed, and a lot of them are objectively better. But it raises the question, if this is the last real supersport left, is it still worth buying? And if it is, which one do you actually get? Because used ZX6Rs have stunt cages and 65 tooth rear sprockets. And new models, well, they're experiencing their fair share of problems. We've got a lot to talk about today, so let's jump in. Now, I'm going to save you some time. Before you even start browsing Marketplace for a clean, never-dropped ZX6R with aftermarket levers and mismatched fairings, we have to talk about what this bike actually is. Because if you're just getting into middleweight sport bikes, you might not realize how much of an outlier the ZX6R actually is. Because if you're looking for a torquey, versatile sport bike that you can commute with as often as you can hit the twisties, this bike is not that. This is a true blue race replica. It uses a 636cc inline four that makes 127 horsepower. And unlike the new generation parallel twin or three-cylinder not-so-super sports nowadays, the ZX6R doesn't even wake up until 8,000 RPM. There's no instantaneous shove of torque in the seat of your pants when you hit the throttle at low RPM. You gotta work for it a little bit. This style of super sport really comes alive when you start revving it out. 10, 12, 13, 14, all the way to 15 or even 16,000 RPM. That's where the magic happens. Remember, these were meant for racing and track riding, where it's possible to keep the engine on the boil the entire time. That's not as realistic on city streets. It's a massive trade-off for this type of bike. In order to experience what makes supersports so exciting, you have to ride them on the street in a way that's impossible at worst or inconvenient at best, and usually to the chagrin of law enforcement officers. Now, you compare that to bikes like the RS660 or the Yamaha R9, and it's a night and day difference. Those bikes split the difference between sporting usability and real-life usability. They make power where you need it, not just the tip top. But if you're watching this video, I'm gonna guess you couldn't give less of a fuck about that, right? You want sky-high revs. The ZX6R is significantly less amenable than those bikes. The ergonomics are aggressive, you got low clip-ons, high rear sets, and the first time you swing a leg over it, you'll realize this bike was not designed for comfort. It's designed for going fast. And when you're in the right gear and the right portion of the rev range, pushing this bike the way it was designed to be ridden, it delivers an experience that next-gen supersports just simply cannot match. But be warned, because for the other 95% of the time, sitting in traffic, cruising the highway, it kind of feels like the wrong tool for the job. Now look, the ZX6R isn't as obsolete as the Gixxer 600, or it's not even as outdated as the CBR 600RR is here in America, but it's undeniably extremely specific. And whether or not that's a good thing depends on what you're expecting to get from it. If the ZX6R is this compromised, hyper-specific machine born of an entirely different era, why does it still exist? Why is it still being sold? Because, by all accounts, it probably shouldn't. The 600cc Supersport class has been on life support for years now. Yamaha yeeted the R6 from their lineup, much to the chagrin of its smooth-brained devotees. Suzuki hasn't meaningfully updated the Gixxer 600 since both Steve Jobs and Bin Laden were still alive. Triumph also yeeted the Daytona 675 a while back, and Honda kinda shows up to the category depending on what continent you live on. For us here in the States, they've left the CBR 600RR to rot as if it were no better than a crusty trailer park Gixxer. For the most part, manufacturers have moved on from the four-cylinder supersports, the 600 class. These bikes are costly to develop, difficult to make emissions compliant, and increasingly irrelevant for how people actually ride motorcycles today. Even though inline 4 supersport squids will defiantly say otherwise in the comment section of every video, even if it has nothing to do with supersports, they just kind of chime in about those things. Most riders don't want to rev a motorcycle to 14,000 RPM just to merge onto the freeway. I think torque is kind of a nice thing. So as a result, the industry has adapted. The Aprilia RS660 started off the parallel twin-powered, not-so-supersport craze that kind of hybridized naked bike usability with sport bike chassis, and in my opinion, you get the best of both worlds. Then on the other end, you have the next-gen supersports like the R9, Panigale V2, and RC990R, and guess what? None of those bikes use 4-cylinder engines. Despite this, Kawasaki has held strong. They're single-handedly keeping the traditional supersport alive, which I kind of respect. Not in a, continue to make it unchanged forever until the EPA threatens to shut down our manufacturing facilities if we don't sort of way, but by actually updating and improving the platform as if it was the golden age of supersports again. They kind of exist in their own dimension. So not only can you get that top-end scream, but you also get modern conveniences that make it feel more relevant in the market and less like a kind of quirky heirloom product like the Gixxer 750, which everybody says if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but come on. Can we at least get a quick shifter? I mean, the Gixxer 750 is a dinosaur. The ZX6R isn't here because it makes sense for many riders. It's here because Kawasaki refuses to let the category die, and they still race this damn thing in World Supersport. And for the Monster Energy drinking, flat brim cap wearing crowd, it is a beacon of hope.
Woo, boys, I'll tell you what, I never get tired of listening to this Aprilia 210 V4. It sounds so good. And if you want to make it sound so good in your own driveway, it is a giveaway bike on my website, yammynoob.co. Click the link down below, become a member today, support the show, and get access to win our incredible Aprilia 210 V4 factory. Now let's get back to the show.
And just because Kawasaki is still building the ZX6 doesn't mean every version of it is worth buying. And some of the newer ones have been making headlines for reasons Kawasaki probably is not thrilled about. So the ZX6R has been around for a really long time, but the version most people care about is the 636. Kawasaki made the decision to bump displacement slightly above the traditional 599cc threshold, giving the bike a bit more mid-range without sacrificing top-end scream. I honestly think this is one of the reasons the bike has survived as long as it has, because even when it wasn't the only 600, it was famously the easiest to live with by comparison. Now, the 636 era first ran from 2002 to 2005, but look, that was over 20 years ago. And sure, Japanese bikes are known to be reliable, but these old 636s have lived about as hard of a life as a motorcycle can. I mean, there's a guy here on YouTube called Brian636 that shows you just how hard of a life they live. It's a pretty good stunt rider. People have been tracking these, stunting them, stretched swing arm kits combined with nitrous. Never underestimate the moral failings of a 2000s era squid. And for the modern era, the ZX6R saw a major chassis and design overhaul for the 2009 model year. It was lighter and better handling than previously, but it was limited to a 599cc inline 4, so I think you should just go ahead and skip those, and what you really want to look to is 2013, which is actually my favorite generation of 636. This was when the 636 came back, and the ZX6R became slightly more tailored for street riding. And again, this is my favorite, I think it looks the best, and I think it's the perfect vintage of 636. It had Kawasaki traction control, better brakes, and optional ABS. And for a long time, this was the sweet spot for buyers. Old enough to be affordable, new enough to be unlikely to become a total disaster. Now in 2019, the bike was modernized further with new styling, LED headlights, and a quick shifter as standard. It still feels like it belongs in the modern era while holding on to old school DNA. Now in 2024, the ZX6R saw engine updates to maintain Euro 5 emissions compliance, and it received a TFT display with updated ride modes and a new front fairing. On paper, you'd think this is the best 636 to date, but instead, to everyone's surprise, the current gen has been the most problematic 636 ever. Over the last year, there have been increasing reports of engine-related issues on the newest ZX6Rs. We're talking about bottom-end failure due to a seized crankshaft bushing. We talked a lot about it on this channel because it was kind of a big deal for a Japanese bike to undergo this. Bikes were recalled, inspected, and repaired, and then some were even recalled again. Kawasaki issued do not ride notices to owners and stop sales to dealers. Now, as far as I know, this recall saga still isn't fully resolved by the time I'm recording this in April of 2026. As Kawasaki is still working on replacing engines where necessary, and all these cases are still ongoing. But it's something you should absolutely be aware of if you're shopping new, or even lightly used. If you see a suspiciously low-priced ZX6R for sale on Facebook Marketplace, that's probably why. And I think it's kind of ironic that the newest ZX6R might be the most problematic. So, if the last real 600 comes with a few question marks, what else is out there? If you're shopping for a super sport, there are two different camps. The ZX6R, as mentioned, is the last truly modern, traditional 600. The Gixxer 600 is technically still around, but it's not spiritually relevant. I can't even believe you can still buy a brand new like that. It uses a 599cc inline-4, making about 110 horsepower. It has classic super sport DNA and all of the concessions that come with it. It has not meaningfully changed since 2011. Yet somehow it's still priced like a modern motorcycle. It's like buying a flip phone in 2026. Sure, it's novel and old school, but it probably shouldn't cost what a brand new iPhone costs. Globally, the CBR 600RR is much closer to the ZX6. Its electronics have been updated with an IMU, winglets, and all the bits and bobs that make it feel more relevant. But in the US, we don't get that version. We get the old one, which kind of feels like Honda's taking a card out of Suzuki's playbook. And I hear ya. You could get a used R6, but you'd be a moron to do that. It's a legendary bike, but do you see what people are trying to charge for these motorcycles? It's absurd. It uses a 599cc inline-4 that makes between 115 and 127 horsepower, depending on the generation. They don't make them anymore, so owners think they're made out of gold or something. I've clowned on so many people on our It Came From Facebook series who are trying to sell these bikes for like 14 grand. They're not worth 14 grand. Now, the modern alternatives are far more interesting. The Aprilia RS660 started this shift. It uses a 659cc parallel twin with a cross-plane crank, makes about 100 horsepower, but way more torque than a 600, and all while sounding pretty exotic too. You don't have to wring this bike out to get the bike hustling. It pulls from down low through the mid-range and still has enough top end to feel sporty. Its tech is pretty crazy with an IMU-based rider aid system, quick shifter up and down, and even cruise control. It's a far more usable package, but it is Italian, so if you're concerned about dealer network, service cost, or other anxieties, there is a Japanese alternative. Yamaha first followed the RS660 with the R7 back in 2021, but at just 72 horsepower, no one who is considering a ZX6R is going to give this bike the time of day. The R9, on the other hand, is the worthy competitor. This bike is Yamaha finally admitting that the 600 era is over. It uses the CP3 engine from the MT-09, making 117 horsepower and 69 foot-pounds of torque. While a tad down on top-end power than a ZX6R, this bike makes more power nearly everywhere else in the rev range. It genuinely feels fast all of the time, not just at high RPM. It's got good modern electronics, good reliability, and much more usability. But it also doesn't really feel like a 100% true super sport. You can tell this bike was designed to appeal heavily to street riders, and for some people, that's perfect. For others, it will feel like something is missing. We had an R9 as a giveaway bike last year, and while it was perfectly fine, it just didn't stick with me the way that other motorcycles have. And if I were to pick between the two, I'd probably get a ZX6. But the bike that did stick with me was the Ducati Panigale V2. Now, this is a next-gen super sport that I still think about often and pretty fondly. It uses an 890cc V twin engine that makes 120 horsepower and 69 foot-pounds of torque, way more than a 600 could ever dream of. It looks great, it sounds incredible, and has top-tier electronics and Ducati's chassis magic that they just sprinkle onto everything. Yet it's nowhere near as punishing to ride as a ZX6R. But you've got to pay to play. The Ducati tax is real. You have a much higher MSRP, higher maintenance cost, and overall a more expensive ownership experience. So if that's not you and you're not about that life, don't do it. And an honorable mention, because Kawasaki's out here just completing side quests, is the ZX4RR. This is kind of an oddball bike. It's a tiny baby version of the ZX6 with a little bit more street concessions. If you want that screaming inline-4 sound and you want to bang off the limiter and kind of all the gears all the time, but not immediately go to jail, check out that bike. We had one as a giveaway back in 2023, and I thought it was really fun. The old 600s are either outdated, discontinued, or overpriced. The new bikes are punchier, more usable, and way more advanced. And then the ZX6R just kind of sits in the middle of all of that. It might not objectively be the best, but it certainly is the most unique. It offers something that neither old bikes or new bikes can replicate. So after all that, who should actually get a ZX6R? Because at this point, it's pretty obvious it's not the logical choice. It's an emotional choice. If you want the best performance on the street, there's better options with more torque and more usable power and more quality of life features. If you want comfort, you skip the ZX6R. You only buy this bike for the experience, the top-end rush of a screaming inline-4. You want to kiss the rev limiter before every upshift. You want a bike that demands your commitment to the bit. If your riding is mostly on track or canyon twisties and you're willing to sacrifice convenience for adrenaline, then a ZX6R might be what you want. You don't want a next gen or a not so super sport. You just want a real goddamn super sport, built the way the Big Four intended 30 years ago with modern features to match. The ZX6R has anchored that market, so if it's that authenticity you crave, it sounds like you've already made up your mind. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of today's video. I appreciate you checking it out. We have tons of content on the ZX6 as we had one as a giveaway bike back in 2022. Go in the back catalog and check those out. We are creating daily content here on Yami Noob. Go and subscribe to the channel and support the show on yaminoob.co, and I'll catch you in the next one.